Good morning, everyone. I hope this presentation will inform and educate, but most importantly, hopefully engage you to maybe take some take-home thoughts. It's a very simple concept, but actually I think it's one which we've dropped. And I actually came across it doing some work for a charity in Sweden this time last year. And the fact that it was a very basic office in Gothenburg, and I'd never seen people standing at work before, made me think, what's this all about? In fact, the more questions I asked, the more I realized that they were in Mars and I was in Venus. So that's just the backdrop. And actually it all starts with the sitting calculator. I cannot engage with you, or you cannot engage with yourself on this subject if you don't understand how much you sit. So I'd like you all, if you don't mind, just over the course of the next 30 seconds, I'm going to come back to this, to actually complete this for yourselves in your own mental high, because I'm going to try and put you into different categories. So we need to allocate time to how much time you spend each day in a work day. So eating, commuting, office, work, at home, and relaxing. Clearly, we have taken moderate activity out of our day-to-day. And the wonderful technology has helped us do that, but actually, it's had a huge impact. In the 60s, 50% of us had moderate activity in the workplace. Today, it's less than 15%. That doesn't come without a cost. So now I'm going to ask you, please, anyone who basically thinks they sit for less than 4 hours a day, could they please stand up? Does anyone think they sit between 6 and 4 hours a day? Could they please stand up? Thank you. So that's probably about 15%. Okay, you can sit down, thank you. Anyone who thinks they sit between 8 and 10 hours a day? Okay, that's probably at least 50 to 60%. And then finally, anyone who thinks they sit more than 10 hours a day? Could they stand up? You're being very I applaud you, to be honest, because actually there's probably a lot more in here than that. Okay, so here we go. The average is in England and most of the world is 9 hours a day. It's the issue about prolonged sitting that's the problem. Okay, we need to break up our sitting time. But actually, the guideline for sitting levels is actually about half that level, so it's 4 to 5 hours a day. It all depends on how much it's broken up. Certain things happen when we're sitting, which may be quite interesting. Basically, the enzymes, lipotine lipase, that move the bad cholesterol and fat out of your arteries and blood towards your muscles, but they can be burnt off. They lose 90% of their functionality when we're sitting. Okay? Obviously, our metabolic rate almost also collapses when we're sitting. It needs jigging. We need to fidget. Even that gets it moving. Our blood sugar levels are disturbed. And actually, I'll come back to this. And more scarily, in terms of the diabetes scare, which incidentally takes up 10% of our national health budget and is growing out of control, it affects increased insulin levels and also blood pressure levels. And finally, many of you will all experience, you get tingling after certain periods of sitting. Where do I go from here? I mean, effectively, it affects everything in different degrees, and the level of research is also different, more or less extensive. But fundamentally, it hits on all those things. Okay? Now, interestingly, it's only in the last 5 years that this information, this science, has become compelling. Up until then, it was interesting, but clearly, it wasn't getting a lot of investment. And actually, sedentary science, or sedentary behavior, is pretty much at the bottom of the silo when it comes to physical activity research, cancer research, mental health research, diabetes research. So when I actually came back from Sweden, I started to look into this, and I suddenly realized, actually, this is a very simple subject, but actually it's got made complicated because actually all the silos don't speak to each other. None of this, if you're studying sedentary behavior and its effect on cancer, you have no idea of its effect on diabetes. So I suddenly realized we have to have a campaign to bring this all to attention, and I'll come back to that later. I'm not going to dwell on this, but for reference, it's on our website, but it'll also be in the pack that you get. But effectively, how excessive sitting affects pretty much every part of the body. This is something that one of our patrons, Professor John Buckley, has brought to the fore. And effectively, when we talk about physical activity, we actually really only, we only really talk about whether we're inactive or active. That's generally what people think of. Actually, it's a gear stick, and that's how we need to think of it. And by and large, the high-intensity exercise, which is actually where the guidelines all go and where all the focus on awareness in terms of public health, or indeed in terms of media, it goes on gear stick 4. Maybe a bit of 3, but we pretty much avoid first gear, second gear, and indeed reverse. In terms of metabolic rate, when we're at a desk sitting, I mean, generally it's plus or minus 20%, but fundamentally, when we're standing, we're spending 40% more, expending 40% more energy when we're standing. But when we're standing and fidgeting, like I am doing now, and moving around, it's another big leap. So effectively now I'm spending twice as much energy as you all. In terms of professions that are most at risk in terms of sedentary lifestyles, well, it probably is quite obvious. I would imagine most of you sit in one of those 3. So where do we go with this? Well, it's not just about breaking up sitting. We have to radically reduce our sitting time by about 3 to 4 hours on average. Okay, that's quite a lot. That's quite a big chunk. But actually, it's not actually that difficult. Now, it was referred to earlier in terms of Scandinavia being at the forefront of workplace health and care. In Scandinavia, over 90% of office workers have a sit-to-stand workstation. They've had it since the 90s. They've had it before they actually knew about the science. It was more brought in through their paternal guidelines. It's not law, it's guidelines. So when we think of this whole area in wellness, we always think about, we could think about ergonomics, how much do we invest in your chair, how much do we invest in your back area issues, health management, healthcare, fitness, health. But actually, we don't focus on the problem. So in terms of if we were to replace between 2 and 4 hours a day, what impact will that have? Well, first of all, on employees. Clearly, it impacts your metabolism. It's actually been now referred to that if you could change 3 hours, convert 3 hours of your sitting each day to standing, it's equivalent of running or burning off 10 marathons a year. Also, you feel more positive and alert. Body language is better. We are more open for business when we're standing. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, reduce risks. It depends on various things, but generally you're talking about between 40 to 60% of heart disease. And cancer is anywhere between, certain cancers is actually bowel and womb cancer, which are our biggest risks. And they tend to be anywhere between, major research came out of Germany, which incorporated over 6 million people and 70,000 cancer cases, and attributed an 8 to 12% increase for every 2 hours you sit beyond 4 hours a day of bowel cancer and womb cancer. I mean, basically, it doesn't really go. I'm not a doctor, so I think this one lends itself to self understanding. But fundamentally, our joints, we are designed for constant movement. And really, what we're doing by prolonged sitting is just building up a time bomb of problems in later life, both for individuals and indeed for society. So what does this mean to the employers? Well, clearly, wellness is a new subject, and that's not my first entry, to be honest, when I go into employers to discuss the subject. Because quite frankly, what do they care? Apart from the obvious, most like to think about where's it going to hit the bottom line? The cost of this. Why am I going to suddenly change and invest? My answer back is actually, can you afford not to? Quite simply, productivity. There are certain tasks you will do better standing than sitting. You'll go your routine tasks, your inbox, your calls. You will do better standing. There are certain tasks done better sitting. Any detailed creative thought or thinking or writing or any numbers and analysis, you're better sitting. But what we would say is mix it up. Right, also, meetings, if you've ever had standing meetings, I'm sure many of you have in the past, you realize they are much more to the point, more effective, and have a much more response and successful conclusions. And then finally, when you're standing at your desk, you tend to be open for business. When you're sitting, you tend to be, this is my space. This is my space, and the body language is very much approach me at your own danger. In terms of engagement, well, clearly, traditionally the reason towards sit-stand actually because they can't physically sit. That's been the traditional. It's been a wheelchair product, sit-stand. It needs to be completely thrown into the other spectrum where our faculty is an engagement and liberalizing product. People who use it have a 80 to 90% positive approach to it. Once you get over the various self-conscious issues and behavioural change issues, but actually it needs to be educated and trained in. No one should be just sent to a sit-stand desk and expected to just get it from there. Okay? It's very, very important and has a huge impact of take-up, the level of education and indeed monitoring and evaluation. In terms of better attendance, this is an area which, quite frankly, we need to research more. In fact, the whole subject needs to be researched more. What we do know is this prolonged sitting is a problem. What we don't know is all the various financial merits in terms of, apart from anecdotal and self-reporting, of where this actually is the bottom line. So we are doing some trials with call centres in particular, and actually there we're just getting things like call quality is much better, and then call response rates are higher, but this is not yet scientific. And that's where effectively the campaign goes further, in terms of drawing attention to this and drawing attention to companies. So there are companies who are actually about to now start major trials. So in terms of basic productivity, well, what do we invest in generally? We invest in sickness absence, occupational health, stress management, occupational psychology, all these wonderful things. But in terms of sit-stand, less than 1% of office workers in this country have sit-stand. And I take it that compares to over 90% in Scandinavia. Okay. Now it is growing. You may have heard of it. I don't know, but it is certainly growing. But it needs a tsunami effect. In terms of trial and basic, this is only 80 intervention of 80 people, and on over 3 days. But really, what it's indicated on the first day, people were asked to actually only use it if they felt fatigue. On the second day, we were asked to use it as much as they felt. And on the third day, they actually say, just use it as you wish. And what conversion rates were is effectively people use it more, on the third day more than 2.5 times than on the first day. So then once they got into the habit, they actually embraced it. But more importantly, in terms of what it did in terms of breaks, it made breaks for people who used it more were shorter. And in fact, the non-standers spent twice as long on breaks as the standers. In terms of the basis business case, because that's where it all comes down to, and you can put in whatever numbers in here, and I've just basically assumed an average piece of equipment is £400. Quite frankly, you can put shelves up just along the corridor, whatever, just to break up sitting time. But the average piece of equipment ranges between 400 and 2,000. But now, in terms of productivity, we've said here you get between 5 and 20%. So I've just put a random 12% in there. If you have a second monitor, it actually has a greater impact. But basically, we're talking about, in terms of days, and as I said, you can play around with these numbers as much as you wish, but you're talking about days in terms of payback. So who's moving? Well, interestingly enough, it's actually people moving for different reasons in different sectors. And actually, Baker McKenzie, major law firm, they went 100% sit-stand last year. And actually, if you now apply for a job at Baker McKenzie, you have to agree, as part of your terms and conditions, to spend some time standing during the day. So they have completely embraced the concept. In terms of, Croydon Council are probably the first of the public sector, but I like this story. It's one of my favourite. Wellington, which is actually a relatively small financial advisor, but highly innovative and award-winning. They were moving to a new office, and their chief executive asked all employees if they had any thoughts in terms of what they would like for the new office. And Johnny, relatively junior, mid-20s, said, well, actually, I've heard about sit-stand, and I was wondering if we could have that. And he was laughed at. Well, he was really laughed at. And actually, so that was poo-pooed, and then the next day he decided, well, I'll send a few articles. And he sent some articles to the chief executive of what his research had come to. And the chief executive basically came back and said, listen, this idea has merit. Anyone who anyone who like it can have it. So 13 people ended up taking it. I think it was about 13%. And after a month, the whole office shoved it, and the whole office wanted it. No. So where are we going with the subject? Well, actually, it is all about active working. We need to bring activity in our workplace. And standing is an element of it, but you know, there's so many other things that we can do in terms of avoiding using lifts, stand-up meetings, speaking when we're trying to make every effort to speak when we can. So we have a summit which is entitled The Sedentary Office, A Case for Change. Now you all have details of this. Worktech have very kindly, or the Unwork have very kindly, let me put this with you. But basically, it's had endorsement from Dame Sally Davis, the Chief Medical Officer for England. On the eve of the summit, we're putting together a 2-page document, which is we're trying to get published in The Lancet. And we're bringing in the top professors on the subject and any case studies on the subject. And this is an inaugural event. It's the first event of its nature, focused at the workplace. It's not focused at the science, it's focused at the workplace. We're also going to be running, so that's top down, that Active Working Summit, but we're also going to be hosting or running an event in conjunction with the British Heart Foundation next April, which is going to be at grassroots level and drawing attention to the city problem. So that's through their Health at Work program. It doesn't necessarily involve sit-stand. There's other ways of reducing sitting time. But clearly sit-stand goes a huge way to just eroding that chunk of 3 to 4 hours we need to get to. Way down here. Right, I'm just going to quickly go through the various sit-stand solutions. And quite frankly, as I mentioned earlier, you could start even just by having shelves on the side of a corridor that people can move their laptops to. It's not ergonomic in terms of your neck movement, because basically your posture has to be eye to screen, and your wrist needs to be at least 1 centimeter to 1 inch below your elbow. Those are the key basics. Once you've got that, you're on a huge way to improve posture. Right, so basically you have electronic solutions. Go up and down. These also can monitor how much time you are actually sitting or standing. So there are actually now come to market ones whereby you literally, like an Oyster card, you click in, you click out, hot desk or not, it knows how much time you're sitting or standing. But also it can prompt you as to when to sit to stand. Okay, so basically you put in your goals. How many calories you want to burn a day, or indeed how many minutes in an hour do you want to stand? And it'll basically prompt you. Then there are also high counterbalance situations. So avoiding the electricity, just basically counterbalance where you just basically push up and they spring load back. Then we have what we call retrofit solutions. So what you put on your existing desks. And this is a new solution. Rather pricey, but it's very, very smart. And this is I dare say, a bit of a donkey solution, but it actually delivers on a number of fronts. And then, yeah, so these are other solutions. So the area is new, and then we have the area treadmill desk, but for walking meetings, for example. But this is not a practical solution for the vast majority of workplaces. So there, I'm done. So if I have time for questions, I'll take any, but if not, one question.
Let's have one question, yeah, absolutely. Anybody with a question for Gavin? Yes, one question here. If you've got the microphone, please. So if you just wait for the microphone, please. And introduce your name and company, please.
Hi, Mike Taylor, Goldman Sachs. What drives the increment with dual monitors?
Well, basically, if you're having to do different tasks, so you're multitasking. So basically, rather than having to click, 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 which way you can actually have your email on one screen and your spreadsheet or whatever on the other, or your Word document. Some people often flicker between the two, and it creates just delays. I mean,
Terrific.
okay.
Gavin, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I was just thinking, actually, Gavin, do you think we should ask them to stand up for a minute? Yes, I think we should, actually. Please, everybody just stand up and
Well, shake it all
stretch
about.
your legs and shake it all about.
Okay.
I'm Gavin Bradley. Thank you very much indeed.